Ta-da, here it is. But why is it so small?
Well, one, that's what she said. And two, it's because we started reviewing TVs that were 65 inch. Then we went to bigger TVs and bigger and bigger and bigger. And now everyone's like, we can't afford those ones. So do a normal size TV again.
Yeah, we gotta please the people. So I know it's a Sony, but which one is it?
This is the Bravia 7. The Bravia 9 is the top one. This is a mini LED right below it, and it's between that and the carryover X90L from last year. So I'm excited to see how good this TV is, where it fits into the lineup, and if we should recommend it. So really, let's just get into the video.
Let's go for it.
So stick around to the end of the video because I'm going to give buying advice on this Bravia 7, but the unboxing was pretty straightforward. You have the goodie bag with your instructions, your remote, and your power cord, and then you have a couple of feet to put on the TV, and that's pretty much it. Now, one great thing about Sony TVs is they do a good job of protecting the screen. In this instance, once we took the top off the box, there were a bunch of cardboard support pieces on the front so that the TV didn't get damaged, and I think that's a great idea. It just really makes me confident that the TV is going to arrive in good shape. Now, sometimes it takes us a very long time to put the stand on because they're so complex, but these feet just slide right in and you can either put them in a narrow position or a wider position. So that's something that took us like 15 minutes less time than normal. And as you can see with the TV laying down here, it kind of has the same Sony form factor of previous mini LEDs and even the previous LED TVs in this 9 series or above, where it has that nice checkerboard pattern. It's a little bit thinner though with the mini LED, and I like that. Now, when we were taking the remote out to turn the TV on, we noticed that there's a small change, and unfortunately it's not that it's backlit this year, but now the cover of it has a little bit of a paint splatter on it. So it's more or less the exact same remote as last year with just a little bit cooler of a finish. So let's turn this on and check it out. First off, it is the same operating system, Google TV. It's probably my favorite operating system out of all the TVs just because it's so interactive. If you have a Google account, which I'm assuming most people do, but we watch YouTube and YouTube TV, and so it knows what videos you've watched or what shows you've watched, and you can just pick up and resume where you left off, even from other TVs. So I really like that. There are some free TV channels from Google TV here, and also the Sony Pictures Core app. I think it was called Bravia Core app before, but now you can get that, and you also get some free movies when you purchase a Sony TV that you get for a year or two, so that's pretty awesome as well. I do like when you're not using the TV that kind of goes into an ambient mode, so you do have some cool artwork behind it, and you can get the time temp and all that. So that's another feature that I think is useful for LED TVs. I don't leave my OLED on it often intentionally, but sometimes it's just accidentally on and it still looks pretty nice. Now, once we get to the SDR content, sports, cable, etc., the Bravia 7 is bright as shit. Now, I knew it would be brighter than the X90L that we saw up at Sony, but I didn't know by how much. Having it in the house here, you can clearly see that it's extremely bright TV, and the content looks good as well. As per usual, Sony TVs upscale fantastically, so when you're looking at sources that are halfway decent, it looks fantastic on the Sony. Now, when you look at content that's not great at all, if some of these like interviews where they're on Zoom calls on these sports channels, it still looks pretty bad, but I think that's just a product of, you know, the actual source that it's being fed. But more or less, low resolution or low bandwidth content looks really good on Sony's, and it looks accurate with regards to its color. It isn't very overly saturated. It doesn't look, you know, overly pixelated, and, you know, more or less it's a very solid picture when you're watching cable and this kind of content. So we're going to talk about the backlight system in a little bit here because it is new and there are more dimming zones, but we did have a little bit of trouble at first. The scenes seemed to be getting brighter randomly, and then they would be darker again and then randomly getting brighter again, but that went away for some reason. We're not sure if the software updated or if it was just something in the eco mode or ambient light detection. There was a bunch of things that you have to turn off in order to get, you know, max brightness. So it's kind of something you should check out yourself and make sure all those settings are off. But more or less, it's not doing it any longer. So we feel like that, you know, issue is gone. And honestly, it looks fantastic when we're watching this sort of content. So we're going to move on to the HDR content now. So when you just have HDR videos off of YouTube, they typically look really good on a lot of these TVs, and this Bravia 7 is no exception. And when you're watching movies, it looks pretty good too. Now, it's a little caveat with that. The Bravia 7 looks very accurate and not overly bright when watching scenes in movies like Avatar, or when we watch scenes in this Luca movie, which is something we test a lot. What I mean by that is it's not too bright, it's not too dim in your averagely lit scene. So it's kind of hard to explain that. I think it would look very very good up against a reference monitor as we saw it when we were up at Sony pictures. And when it's in a bright scene, it looks super bright, like not overly bright, not overly exposed. It's not like radically different than I would expect, but it looks nice and bright, more so than an OLED would look full screen. So for the most part, I'm pretty happy with the HDR. Now, when we're watching darker scenes, it gets a little tricky because, as I had said before, the backlighting system is new, and the only real downside to this HDR so far is that when you're watching a really dark scene, it is really dark. I mean, I can hardly see any detail on some of these scenes that are really dark in Luca, and I noticed that it's in Dolby Vision bright. So if you go Dolby Vision dark, it's even darker. And sometimes Dolby Vision itself can make these scenes look a little darker. But if I go into the settings, there's always ways to brighten up the scene a little bit more. I mean, you can go in and change the tone mapping to gradation preferred or brightness preferred. You can also increase the advanced contrast enhancer, which greatly changes how that backlight system works. So there are a lot of settings if you wanted to get more out of it. I just was noticing that with the settings kind of, your standard way that you'd want to review the TV, that it goes from being pretty bright to pretty dark in some of these scenes. And again, I think that has to do with the backlight system being a little aggressive, which we can talk about right now. So we have a few tests to check out the backlight system, and Sony told us that this is going to have 3 to 5 times the amount of dimming zones as their TV last year, the X90L. And we did get to see them compared to each other. X90L was not nearly as good as this Bravia 7 with regards to the dimming zone count, how it can handle the zones. But there's still some issues. And what it is that you're in that in-between where you're trying to not have blooming around the circles or around things, but also not suppress highlights to a degree. So when you're in a challenging scene, you can see highlights, but the black areas are still black, and thus it gives it great contrast. And it does look a little bit better than some of the Sonys we've seen in the past, but it does look like it is suppressing highlights a little bit. And when we go to something like the Starfield test, it kind of reinforces that scene in Luca that we showed earlier, that it's a challenge for this LED to show all these stars, kind of like an OLED would. They're much dimmer, and you can hardly see them from the camera. I can see them in person a little bit better, but you really have to crank up the exposure on the camera in order to see these things, and then you get a lot of reflections back at you, but we'll talk about that in just a second. So overall, I still think that this Sony is doing a pretty good job in general with regards to bright scenes, normally lit scenes that look very accurate and not overly saturated like some TVs do. But then when you get into these darkest scenes, there may be some firmware updates needed, or it might just be challenging with the new backlight system to get it perfect. And I think that over the course of time, it's going to improve. Now, speaking of those reflections, I can see myself in some of these darker scenes, but overall it has fairly good anti-reflective capabilities. I do think it's a little bit better than that 9 series, like the 90L that we were talking about, but it's not quite as good as the X95L last year. And I'm sure the Bravia 9 will be very similar, where it has very, very good anti-reflective properties. And also another side effect of that good anti-reflective coating is the Bravia 9 will probably be better from off angle than this Bravia 7 is. It's not bad from off angle, but it's not fantastic either. It's kind of like in between. You know, if you get a QD OLED, for example, you can see the exact same view from the side or straight on. So these LED TVs aren't that, but it still looks pretty good from off angle. But going back to the actual anti-reflective capabilities, it's probably a 6 or 7 out of 10. Not as good as an OLED, not as good as a highest end LED TV, but still pretty good and better than most TVs. And lastly is the dirty screen test or uniformity test. Now, LED TVs sometimes don't look great. Overall, this Bravia 7 looks fairly clean. It looks fairly normal. It doesn't look too blotchy on any of the areas. And so overall, I think people that would get this TV would be pretty happy and wouldn't notice much or any of what we call that dirty screen. So pretty much good to go on that test. Now, with regards to gaming, it's great to actually see a Sony that has 4K 120 with VRR out of the box without any issues. It's just working. And that's not something that could be said a couple years ago. So I know a lot of people that buy Sony TVs and that do game will be very happy with that. Now, it is still only 2 HDMI ports that do 4K 120, but still everything's working. Gameplay seems very smooth and responsive at the same time. Now, sometimes Sony TVs are still not quite as quick as other TVs with regards to their input lag, but more or less very happy with the speed and to see those stats working. On the other hand, it does look a little bit dark. We noticed that game mode is very dark on this Sony, but we were able to change a couple settings to help brighten it up a bit. One of those is just by raising the black level from nothing to just low. By just doing that in the game mode, it actually changed it significantly. So I'm not really sure why it's so dark with that set it off, but if you just set it to low, it looks so much better. And I think that that's where I would put it, to be honest. And we also noticed that if you put it in the FPS gaming mode, that brightens it up as well. So it's kind of weird that those things needed to be turned on in order to get it to be like what we think would be a proper brightness level and to see some of the shadow areas, but it significantly improved it. And I'm not a gaming expert, nor am I a calibration expert, but these are just two quick settings that I found in this game bar, which is pretty cool in the Sony TV. So if you guys can get into that and make those changes and it brightens up your gaming and brightens up your day, then I'm glad it helped out. Okay, so on to buying advice. Now, this Bravia 7 is one of 4 new TVs from Sony, and yet there's a couple TVs from last year that are carrying over. And I think currently a 65-inch is about $2,000, meaning it's a little bit expensive, but still a fairly good product for the price. At the beginning of the year, it's always challenging to just say that a 65-inch Bravia 7 is definitely worth $2,000, especially because the X90L below it is $1,100 at the same time. However, as time goes on, I believe that the Bravia 7 price will come down and it'll be at a good price point compared to how much better it is than the X90L. And for me, I would take this because it's brighter, it has more dimming zones, and it has a little bit better anti-reflective capabilities in my opinion. So it's a little bit better of a product, and I saw that live when we were at the Sony event. Now, early in the year, the X93L is still available, and I think that that's very similar in comparing the TVs. So for a $400 price point difference, I probably would just get the X93L. But that TV isn't a carryover, and so down the road, it may not even be available. But if you really want the best Sony, it's going to be the Bravia 9 this year, and currently that's $3,300. I have yet to review that, but I'm excited to get a chance to do so. And if any of the downsides, like the dimming algorithm or how it looks in dark scenes, concern you, then you might want to look for something like the A80L or even the Bravia 8 this year, which are both OLED TVs. Sony also has the A95L carrying over, which is the QD OLED. So there's a lot of TVs to buy. But besides those darker scenes that we had a little bit of an issue with, this is a really good TV. I definitely think it's an upgrade from the X90L. I think it's something that people are going to look at in 2024 and beyond for its brightness, for its accuracy, and for its HDR and gaming performance. So I'm excited to hear what you guys think. Let me know in the comments if you have any questions or if you're excited for this TV or any other Sony TVs. Make sure to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel if you're not already subscribed, and I will see you guys in the next video.